So this is Reading Writing 120, and today's lecture is on King Lear. Before getting to the lecture, I first want to go over the terms that I sent to you in the email, some of which by now you're very familiar with. Thou and thee in Shakespeare's day meant you, thy, your, thine, your, or yours. Alack was an expression of regret. Art could mean are, A-R-E. Canst, can. Dost, do. Doth, does. Ere, before. Fain, willing or gladly. Hast and hath could mean have. Hence, from here. Hither, to here. Methinks meant it seems to me. Tis was a shortened form of it is, and wherefore meant why. Three new terms for this week. Ague in Shakespeare's time is a fever. Fie is an expression of disgust or disapproval. And fond meant foolish. Three terms that I'd also like to revisit, literary terms that I've discussed in the previous lecture. Literary allusion. Remember, a literary allusion is a passing reference within a literary text to another well-known text. An aside is where a character expresses to the audience his or her thoughts aloud in a short speech unheard by the other characters on stage. A soliloquy is where a character alone on the stage utters his or her thoughts aloud. Finally, I included in the email a reference to classical mythology, the Wheel of Fortune. In ancient Roman mythology, this is the wheel spun by Lady Fortuna, the goddess of chance. A person's position on the wheel determined whether he or she will have happiness or sorrow, victory or defeat. Well, let's now turn to our edition of King Lear, the Signet edition, and go to page number 110 and pick up where we left off in Act 4, Scene 6. This is page 110 of the Signet King Lear edition, and this very, very important scene where both plots, the main plot and the subplot, receive a great deal of development. Well, in Act 4, Scene 6, Edgar tricks Gloucester into believing they're atop the cliffs of Dover. Remember, at the end of Act 4, Scene 1, the blinded Gloucester finds himself in the company of this beggar known as Tom of Bedlam. Gloucester doesn't realize that it's his own son, Edgar, in disguise. And Gloucester asks Tom to lead him to the cliffs of Dover, where Gloucester plans to kill himself. So here in Act 4, Scene 6, we have this trick. And at this point in the play, Edgar's motive seems clear. As his father prepares to jump, Edgar he says in an aside, this is at line 33 on page 111. He says, why I do trifle thus, why I play this trick on my father Gloucester, why I do trifle thus with his despair is done to cure it. He's trying to make his father want to live again, to value life. And after Gloucester falls to the ground unhurt, because they weren't really on the cliffs of Dover, Edgar assumes another identity, that of an average working man. And it's in this identity that Edgar convinces Gloucester that he did fall from the cliffs. Line 53, so this is turning over to page 112. Edgar says in his disguise as a working man, 10 masts at each make not the altitude. In other words, 10 ships' masts laid end to end would not measure the height which thou hast perpendicularly fell. And he adds at line 55, thy life's a miracle. Edgar also insists that Tom of Bedlam, had the appearance, line 72, of a fiend, a demon, with line 70, 1,000 noses, and line 71, horns whelked, twisted, and and waved like the rigid sea. So you see, Gloucester had decided the gods had turned against him. And Edgar now argues, line 73, over on page 113, he argues, think that, look at it this way, think that the clearest gods, the most glorious gods, who make them honors of men's impossibilities, the gods who gain honor by doing things impossible to men, have preserved thee. So the strategy works for the time being. Line 75, Gloucester resolves, I remember now, henceforth, from this moment onward, I'll bear affliction till it do cry out itself, enough, enough, and die. Lines 75 to 77. So this is a play about survival and endurance, about the degree to which an individual can bear affliction. Shakespeare wants playgoers to ask themselves, at what point do you simply give up? And if you don't give up, how do you make yourself go on in the face of terrible suffering? What do you tell yourself? So here we have now Gloucester, the blinded Gloucester on the stage, thinking that his life has been miraculously saved when he believed he tried to kill himself, jumping from the cliff, and side by side with Edgar, still in disguise, still not revealing that he is Edgar, Gloucester's son. Edgar now disguised not as Tom of Bedlam, but as an average working man. Well, just as things take a slightly hopeful turn, we get what Edgar calls at line 85, the side-piercing sight of the mad Lear, who is wearing a crown made of weeds and flowers. If we just go back to page 106, Act 4, Scene 4, we get this report. This is at lines 1 to 6, the very first lines, the first 6 lines of the scene. And it's Cordelia speaking. She's describing these reports that she's received of Lear's appearance now that he's reached Dover. She says, alack, 'tis he. Why, he was met even now by a number of my men, as mad as the vexed, as the furious sea. What a simile. Singing aloud, crowned with rank thymiter and furrow weeds, with hardocks, hemlock, nettles, cuckoo flowers, darnel, and all the idle weeds that grow in our sustaining corn. So he's no longer wearing the golden crown as depicted on this brilliant cover of our Signet edition. The cover is by the great Milton Glaser. Lear is now wearing a crown made of weeds and flowers. So at this point, Lear is confronting the shattering of his identity, the realization of the world's injustice, and the horror of his own guilt. If we go to Act 4, Scene 3, the end of Act 4, Scene 3, and this is also on page 106, and it's Kent speaking. Kent reveals to the gentleman that though Lear has reached Dover, he refuses to see Cordelia. In Kent's words, this is at line 46 on page 106, Kent is speaking. He tells the gentleman that the memory of how Lear treated her, quote, stings his mind so venomously that burning shame detains him, holds him back from Cordelia. Lines 46 to 48. He is so guilt-stricken, knowing how unjustly he treated the daughter who loves him. Well, initially in Act 4, Scene 6, so let's go back to Act 4, Scene 6, looking at Lear's entrance on page 114. In Act 4, Scene 6, Lear's ravings are almost incomprehensible. But then Gloucester's white beard prompts him to think of Goneril, and he, Lear, remembers. Let's check out this speech that begins at line 97, the middle of page 114. And this is Lear speaking. He says, they, referring to Goneril and Regan, they flattered me like a dog. Flattery is a major idea in this play. Lear relied and valued flattery so highly when we first meet him in Act 1, Scene 1. And now he's saying they flattered me like a dog, like dogs fawn over their masters, and told me I had white hairs in my beard ere before the black ones were there. He's saying they told me I was wise when I clearly wasn't. Here, white hairs are a symbol of wisdom. To say I, yes, and no to everything I said. They'd never contradict it. I and no too, Lear continues, was no good divinity. To agree with me on everything I said was not wise, right? They treated me, he's saying, like I was a god, a divinity, like I was more than human. Well, he says, when the rain came to wet me once, and the wind to make me chatter, to make me shiver, when the thunder would not peace, it wouldn't keep quiet at my bidding, there I found it. There I came to understand. There I smelt him out. Go to, they are not men of their words. They told me I was everything. 'Tis a lie. I am not ague-proof. I'm not immune to fever. I'm not invulnerable. I'm a human being. I get sick like everyone else does. I'm not a god. So you see here in Act 4, Scene 6, after everything he's been through, Lear finally understands the truth of what Cordelia and Kent tried to tell him in the very first scene. Well, line 109, so this is still on page 114, he tells Gloucester he still considers himself every inch a king. And he begins to reflect on his old life, the days when he ruled Britain. He says, when I do stare, see how the subject quakes. My subjects tremble in my sight because they have so much power and they're so afraid of me. I pardon that man's life. What was my cause? What was your crime? Adultery. Remember, that was Gloucester's crime. Edmund was the result of an adulterous relationship that Gloucester had. He says, what was thy cause? Adultery? Thou shalt not die. Die for adultery? No. The wren, the small bird, goes to it as sex, and the small gilded, golden-colored fly does lecher, also as sex, in my sight. Let copulation thrive. For Gloucester's bastard son was kinder to his father than my daughters. Lear doesn't know what's been going on in the subplot. Gloucester's bastard son was kinder to his father than my daughters, got between lawful sheets, begotten, conceived on a marriage bed. To it, Lear says, luxury, lust, penmel, have at it, for I lack soldiers. I need more subjects to serve in my army. Behold yon, behold that simpering dame, that smiling lady. So now it seems that Lear is perhaps hallucinating. And he sees this woman before him, he says, whose face between her forks, between her headpiece, presages snow, suggests that she is chaste, that minces virtue, pretends to be virtuous, and does shake the head to hear of pleasure's name. She shakes her head in disapproval to hear even the mention of sexual pleasure. She's so prim and so proper. But what's the reality? Lear continues, the finchu, the polecat, or the soiled horse goes to it, has sex with a more riotous appetite than this lady. He continues, down from the waist they are centaurs, though women all above. And in classical mythology, Greek mythology, as our note tells us, the centaurs are lustful creatures with human bodies to the waist, but the lower body and legs of a horse. He continues, but only to the girdle, to the waist, do the gods inherit, do the gods possess. Beneath is all the fiends, the devils. There's hell, there's darkness, there is the sulfurous pit, burning, scalding, stench, consumption, meaning disease. Fee, fee, fee. Those are lines 110 to line 131. So here he compares Goneril and Regan and women in general to animals and demons, expressing disgust with sexuality, particularly female sexuality. So he's really lost it at this point, or so it seems. But then his mind begins to clear. And Lear next speaks powerfully about the corruption of the legal system, the corruption of justice. And this is found in lines 152 to 169. So let's just turn over to page 116 in the Signet edition. And I will read the speech to you, which is a very difficult speech, but I think a very important speech to show the insights that Lear has gained as a result of these harrowing experiences. So he tells the blind Gloucester, starting at line 152 on page 116, a man may see how this world goes by with no eyes. Look with thine ears. See how yon justice, here referring to a judge, how that judge rails upon, condemns yon simple, meaning lowly or poor, yon simple thief. Hark, in thine ear, listen to me, Gloucester, change places. If they switch places, this judge and this thief, and handy dandy, take your choice. It was a children's game in Shakespeare's day. Handy dandy, which is the justice? Which is the thief? So in Shakespeare's time, judges were commonly bribed, and thus they turned out to be thieves as well. Lear then says to Gloucester, thou hast seen a farmer's dog bark at a beggar? Gloucester replies, aye, sir, yes, sir. Lear, and the creature, the beggar, run from the cur, run from the dog? There thou mightst behold the great image of authority, a dog's obeyed in office, in a position of power. Thou rascal beadle. A beadle in Shakespeare's time was a church official whose duty was to whip those citizens who were who were charged with sin. He says, thou rascal beadle. So essentially they were church officials who carried out the punishments on those who were deemed sinners. Thou rascal beadle, hold thy bloody hand, restrain your blood-stained hand. Why dost thou lash that whore? Strip thy own back, he says of the beadle. Thou hotly lust to use her in that kind, in the same way for which thou whippest her. So he's seeing the beadle himself, who's supposed to enforce morality. He wants to have sex with the prostitute. He says the usurer hangs the cozener. So a moneylenderer, an usurer who has been made a judge, sentences a petty thief, right? The cozener to hanging. Thus, one thief hangs another. And he begins to sum his point up in the next few lines of this speech. He says, through tattered clothes, the clothes worn by the poor, through tattered clothes, small vices do appear. Insignificant crimes become apparent and thus are punished. He says, robes and furred gowns, the gowns worn by judges, hide all. They cover up their misdeeds, their corruption, their breaking of the law, and they never get caught because they have power. He says, plate sin with gold, put a sinner in gold armor, or maybe gold cloth, the clothing of the rich, and the strong lance of justice, hurtless breaks. The lance or the spear of justice, which is the symbol of the law, will break without hurting the wealthy sinner. Arm it in rags, when the sinner wears rags, a pygmy's straw. In comparison to the strong lance of justice, a pygmy's straw doth pierce it. He's saying even a piece of straw wielded by a pygmy, a dwarf-like creature, will pierce the sinner's body. So it's a very complicated speech, but what is Lear saying here? He is saying that the legal system unfairly favors the rich over the poor. He's saying that judges and religious officials are themselves corrupt. He identifies all of these injustices and then claims at line 170. So we're still on page 117. He says, none does offend me, none. I say none. I'll able them, I'll free them from prosecution and judgment. Take that of me, my friend, who have the power to seal the accuser's lips. Get thee glass eyes, get yourself a pair of glasses, and like a scurvy, like a lying politician, seem to see the things thou dost not. Now, 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 now. Lines 170 to 174. Everyone, Lear says, everyone is hopelessly corrupt. And so as king, he will allow them to do whatever they want. Lear, however, will not pardon Goneril, Regan, and their husbands. If we move ahead to line 186, this is on the top of page 118. His mind turns to thoughts of revenge. He says this, starting at line 186. It were a delicate stratagem, a subtle strategy, to shoe a troop of horse with felt, to put cloth, felt, on their hooves, to muffle the sound of the approaching cavalry. I'll put it in proof. I'll test out that strategy, he says to himself. And when I've stolen upon, when I've snuck up upon these son-in-laws, Albany and Cornwall, then kill, 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 kill. He repeats that word 6 times, kill. He is still furious. He is still, at least some of the time, fixated on revenge. Well, Lear is back in this scene. Remember, we hadn't seen Lear since Act 3, Scene 6. So Lear is back in Act 4, Scene 6, but there's one character who has not returned, and that is the Fool. He's not with King Lear. And in fact, the Fool never reappears in this play. We never see him again. And the Fool's absence is never explained. And so there's been a lot of debate, a lot of theories on what happened to the Fool. This is something, should you choose to write on the Fool for your King Lear essay, that you'll want to consider. What do I think about the fate of the Fool? Well, let's just go back a page to page 117 and line 185. Lear says at line 185 that he now sees the world at this great stage of fools. And then significantly, at line 192, which is on page 118, he declares, I am even the natural fool of fortune. And in this instance, the word natural means madman. But Edgar is quite right when he says of Lear's speech, this is at line 176, so again, going back to page 117, this is an aside by Edgar. And listening to Lear, Edgar comments, O matter and impertinency, sense and nonsense mixed, reason and madness. Lines 176 to 177. Reason and madness, right? Lear seems mad, but in his speeches, certainly when he's commenting on justice, certainly when he's commenting on the folly of overvaluing flattery, Lear comes across as quite wise. This is also the case with the Fool's speeches. Matter and impertinency, sense and nonsense, reason and madness. So one could say that while the Fool has disappeared, never to be seen again in this play, his fate not explained by Shakespeare, while the Fool has disappeared, perhaps Lear himself has become the Fool. So remember, the Fool was the truth teller. The Fool told Lear the truth, even when Lear didn't want to hear it, right? And the Fool told that truth through riddles, through paradox, through apparent nonsense. Lear doesn't need the Fool any longer, because Lear, after all his suffering, finally sees the truth about himself, the truth about the people around him, the truth about the system, the government systems in Britain, and the truth about the larger world. So next, I want to turn to Cordelia, because she reappears in Act 4 of this play and plays a very big role in Act 5 in the resolution of the story. So I want to look at her scenes. Before I do, let's just go back to Act 4, Scene 2. So in our edition, this is on page 99. Act 4, Scene 2, which is set in Albany and Goneril's palace, includes some very important revelations, some key story developments we learn about in this scene. We learn that Goneril has fallen in love with Edmund. Before he departs, this is at line 22, so this is over on page 100. Before he departs, Goneril in Albany's castle, Goneril kisses Edmund, adding at line 22, this kiss, if it durst speak, would stretch thy spirits, would enlarge your fortunes up into the air. Conceive, do you understand my meaning? And fare thee well. Goneril has fallen for Edmund. Goneril, a married woman, married to Albany. Albany enters the scene in the latter part of Act 4, Scene 2, and we learn that Albany is appalled by Goneril's treatment of Lear. At line 40, so this is over on page 101, Albany scolds his wife. He says, tigers, not daughters, what have you performed? A father and a gracious aged man whose reverence even the head-loved, the baited, enraged bear would lick. Most barbarous, most degenerate, have you madded? You've driven your own father mad. And in response, at line 50, she calls him a milk-livered man, a coward. So up until this point in the story, we're not sure where Albany stands, right? We know that Cornwell, who is Regan's husband, Cornwell is going along with Goneril and Regan's plan to take over the kingdom and take all power from King Lear. Albany is against it. Albany is horrified by what has happened. So that's the second piece of information we learn in this scene. Lastly, we learn that Cornwell has died. He's died of the wound he suffered in Act 3, Scene 7. And this news is reported at lines 70 to 71. Remember, he was about to rip out the other eye of Gloucester when his servant tried to stop him. And in the battle that ensued, the servant got stabbed in the back by Regan, but not before that servant managed to strike Cornwell. And Cornwell, we now find out, died of his wound. So at this point in the story, Goneril and Regan's regime is fracturing, even as the French army has landed in Dover, intent on restoring Lear to the throne. And accompanying that French army is Cordelia, who in Act 4 appears for the first time since the opening scene. Well, throughout the final section of this play, her courage and her compassion are emphasized, as well as her anger over how her sisters have treated their father. At 2 points in the latter part of this play, Cordelia is linked to Christ. The first instance is in Act 4, Scene 4. So let's just turn to Act 4, Scene 4. And this is on pages 106 and 107. And this is the point in the scene on page 107 when Cordelia learns that the British forces are marching toward the French camp, line 21. So war is at hand. The battle is going to be fought. And she addresses her absent father in an aside. And this speech starts at line 23. She says this, she apostrophizes her father. Remember, we discussed apostrophe as a poetic device in connection with Lear in Act 3, Scene 2, when he is talking to the storm, as though the storm could hear him. So even though King Lear isn't there, she addresses him in this speech. And Cordelia says this, start at line 23. She says, "O dear father, it is thy business that I go about. Therefore, great France, the king of France, her husband, my mourning and importuned, begging tears hath pitied." She asked him, when she heard of what was going on in Britain and how terribly her father was being treated by her two sisters, she begged her husband, let me take an army over to Britain to help him, to save him. And she adds, no blown ambition, no puffed up ambition doth our arms incite. That's not the motive. It's not that I want to become Queen of Britain. I'm already Queen of France. What's her motive? She says, but love, dear love, and our aged father's right, his right to the throne. Soon may I hear and see him. Lines 23 to 29 on page 107. So as I said, here we have a reference to Christ, what would be called a biblical allusion. Cordelia's words echo those of Christ in the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 2, verse 49, where Christ says, I must go about my Father's business. So clearly echoing the Bible, clearly a biblical allusion. Just moving ahead to page 118, and this is back in Act 4, scene 6, and this isn't Cordelia speaking, but this is a gentleman of Cordelia's army who has witnessed the mad Lear run away from those who are trying to help him. And speaking of the departed Lear, the gentleman says this. This is at line 208, the bottom of page 118. The gentleman says of Lear, thou hast one daughter who redeems nature from the general curse, which two have brought nature to. So this too is an allusion to the Bible, a biblical allusion. Through their disobedience, Adam and Eve, as described in the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve brought about the fall of humankind. And humankind was ultimately redeemed by Christ's sacrifice. So again, in this allusion, Cordelia, this figure of redemption, is being compared to Christ. Now, it's important to point out that this play is set in pre-Christian Britain. According to Holinshed's Chronicles, one of the main sources of Shakespeare's play, the story takes place in the 8th century BCE, so 800 years before the year 0. Therefore, the characters in the story would not be conscious of these biblical allusions. Cordelia isn't knowingly comparing herself to Christ when she says, it is my Father's business that I go about. Shakespeare, however, would have anticipated the audience recognizing the allusions. He's the one suggesting this comparison, the comparison between Cordelia and Christ. Well, the French soldiers capture the crazed Lear and bring him to their camp, where he's treated by a doctor. And in Act 4, Scene 7, the final scene of Act 4, the old king finally comes face to face with the daughter he disowned. So let's go to page 125. And this is early on, or really halfway between Act 4 and Scene 7. And I want to pick it up at line 44. And this is the big moment when father and daughter come face to face again. Lear has been sleeping, and the doctor believes he's on the mend, even though he's still distracted. He's still a bit delirious. And this is what Cordelia says to him, top of page 125, line 44 on Act 4, Scene 7. She says this, how does my royal lord? How fares your majesty? Lear, awakening from his sleep, says, you do me wrong to take me out of the grave, Thou art a soul in bliss. He mistakes her for an angel. Thou art a soul in bliss, but I am bound on a wheel of fire, that mine own tears do scold like molten lead. Cordelia says, Sir, do you know me? Lear, you are a spirit, I know. Where did you die? And Cordelia says, still, far wide. He's unbalanced. The doctor interrupts. He's scarce awake. Let him alone a while. He's still suffering from this delirium that he experienced as a result of being out in the storm, as a result of losing so much, losing all the power he had. But Lear is more awake than they think, because he continues. He says, Where have I been? Where am I? Fair daylight? I am mightily abused. I'm deceived. What's going on here? I should even die with pity to see another thus. Look at the lengths to which I've fallen. I know not what to say. I will not swear these are my hands. Let's see. I feel this pinprick. Would I were assured of my condition. He's not even certain if he's alive or dead. He doesn't know where he is. Cordelia then says, Oh, look upon me, sir, and hold your hand in benediction and blessing over me. You must not kneel. Lear makes an attempt to kneel to Cordelia. Lear says, Pray, do not mock me. I'm a very foolish, fond old man. 80 and upward. He's 80 years old, not an hour more nor less. And to deal plainly, I fear I am not in my perfect mind. Methinks, it seems to me I should know you, and know this man, Kent, who's still on stage, hoping that Lear will get back to his old self. Yet, Lear says, I am doubtful, for I'm entirely ignorant what place this is, and all this skill I have remembers not these garments, these clothes I'm wearing, nor I know not where I did lodge last night. Do not laugh at me, for as I am a man, I think this lady to be my child Cordelia. And Cordelia says, and so I am your child, I am your daughter. Lear then says, Be your tears wet? He sees that she's crying. Yes, Faith, I pray, weep not. If you have poison for me, I will drink it. I know you do not love me, for your sisters have, as I remember, done me wrong. You have some cause. You have cause to hate me after the way I treated you. They have not. And look at Cordelia's response. It's a single line, and it's just 4 words. Cordelia says, No cause, no cause. Lear then asks, Am I in France? And Kent answers the question, In your own kingdom, sir. We're still in Britain. Cordelia has come here from France to save you. And Lear, still not in his mind, not entirely clear, says, Do not abuse me. Don't deceive me. The doctor then says, Be comforted, good madame. The great rage you see is killed in him. He's no longer in this state of fury and anger. He's no longer out of control. But the doctor adds, and yet is a danger to make him even or fill in the time he has lost. Desire him to go in, trouble him no more till further settling. He needs to recover, he needs to sleep, he needs to heal. And so Cordelia, following the doctor's instructions, asks her father, Will it please your highness walk? Lear replies, You must bear with me. Pray you now, forget and forgive. I am old and foolish. Lines 44 to 85 in Act 4, Scene 7. Lear and Cordelia together for the first time since Act 1, Scene 1. And you'll notice how in this scene, he now addresses her, not as a king, but, line 68, as a man. He addresses her as a man, and he asks for forgiveness. Emma Thompson, who's one of the great actresses, she's done a lot of work in Shakespeare. She played Cordelia back in the 1990s in a Renaissance theater production. Emma Thompson has perceptively noted, this is quoting Emma, Emma has said, Shakespeare's King Lear contains more love and more hate than any other play. I think that is so, so true. King Lear contains more love and more hate than any other play. Well, let's move from Lear and Cordelia, the reconciled Lear and Cordelia, for a moment and turn to Edgar. Because Gloucester and Lear aren't the only ones transformed by suffering. Edgar grows wiser and stronger once he flees from his home. At the end of Act 4, Scene 6, this is on page 120, and this is after Lear runs off. Edgar, now pretending to be a peasant speaking with a rural dialect, demonstrates a fierce quality of his own. Remember that term, fierce quality, that Edmund applies to himself. It's his fierce quality and his cunning, his ruthlessness that will enable him to take his brother's land and eventually take his father's title and come, as we'll see, come so close to becoming the king of Britain. Well, Edgar, he, as I say, demonstrates some fierce quality. He saves his father's life by killing Oswald. Oswald, who is eager to carry out the command Regan gave him back in Act 4, Scene 5, the command to murder Gloucester. We just go back to that scene for a moment, Act 4, Scene 5, that's on page 109. And it's Regan giving the order at line 37, where she says to Oswald, if you do chance to hear of that blind traitor, Gloucester, preferment, promotion falls on him that cuts him off. You know, she's saying we should have never let him live when we ripped his eyes out. Because now everywhere he goes, people feel sorry for him and they think badly of us. Get someone out there and find that old man and kill him. That's exactly what Oswald attempts to do. But he's stopped by Edgar. Edgar saves his father's life. And on Oswald's body, Edgar finds and unseals Goneril's letter. A letter in which she proposes that Edmund murder Albany and marry her. Let's just turn to that letter. It's at the bottom of page 121. And Edgar starts reading it at line 266. So he's reading this letter written by Goneril that she gave to her trusty servant Oswald, never thinking that that letter would wind up in the hands of one of her enemies. Let our reciprocal, our mutual vows be remembered. We have many opportunities to cut him off, referring to her husband, Albany. If your will want not, if you've got the guts to do it, time and place will be fruitfully offered. There is nothing done if he, my husband, return, then I am the prisoner and his bed my jail. From the loathed warmth whereof deliver me and supply the place for your labor. Replace my husband in my bed. Your wife, so I would say, if I could have my way, affectionate servant, and for you, her own for venture. I'm yours if you want me. Goneril. So now Edgar has this letter. He has the letter that not only proves Goneril has betrayed her husband and actually wants her husband killed, the letter proves that Edmund is a villain. And so in Act 5, Scene 1, Edgar sets his plan in motion. Let's just move ahead to page 127. Edgar, still disguised, gives Albany the letter. He gives him that letter and promises at line 43, so this is over on page 129, he promises that he, this disguised Edgar, will produce a champion, a warrior who, in one-on-one combat, line 43, 44, will prove what is avouched, what is stated there, what is stated in the letter. So we see here that the once naive Edgar is now cunning. Well, in Act 5, Scene 2, let's just move ahead to Act 5, Scene 2. This is on page 130 to 131. It's a very short scene. It's only 12 lines long. But I think it's an important scene in the development of Edgar. Because in Act 5, Scene 2, Edgar expresses the philosophy of a survivor. After the battle is lost, so the battle between the French forces led by Cordelia and her men, the King of France's army, faces off against the army led by Albany and Edmund, on behalf of Goneril and Regan. And the battle rages off stage. And in Act 5, Scene 2, we learn the British army won. Cordelia's army was defeated. And so after the battle is lost, Gloucester begins to despair again. This is on page 131 at line 9. Gloucester begins to despair, and he's ready to give up. He's ready to give in to death. Edgar points out the following. He says, "What? In ill thoughts again? Men must endure. They're going hence from here, even as they're coming hither to here. Rightness is all. Come on." And he takes his hand and leads his father away. He's not going to give up. So in this line, humans are compared to fruit that falls off the vine only when it has ripened. Edgar is saying we must always be ready for death, our time of ripeness, but that in the meantime, we must strive to endure whatever life brings our way. Edgar has grown, Edgar has changed, Edgar has become a survivor. Well, in the final scene of this play, Act 5, Scene 3, which begins on page 131 of our text, an overconfident Edmund takes on the disguised Edgar in a one-on-one battle he could have avoided. We see at line 146, this is fairly deep into the final scene. This is on the top of page 138. Edmund states, "What safe and nicely, what cautiously I might delay by rule of knighthood, I disdain and spurn." So he waives his right to know the identity of his opponent. Edmund falls to Edgar, who removes his final disguise, a helmet or a mask, and asserts his true identity. So over the course of this play, a play that to a large degree is about identity, he's been Edgar, Tom of Bedlam the beggar, the bold peasant who in Act 4, Scene 6 defends Gloucester against Oswald, the unknown knight, and now he is Edgar again. In a stunning convergence of plot and subplot, it turns out that the sisters' love for Edmund brings about their downfall. They've defeated Cordelia's French army, right? They've seemingly won the day, but they both have fallen in love or in lust with Edmund, and that's their undoing. Edmund has pledged himself to both Goneril and Regan. This is what he says in his final soliloquy in Act 5, Scene 1. So let's just go back a couple of scenes. And this is on page 130, the very end of Act 5, Scene 1. And it's Edmund in the last soliloquy that he speaks in this entire play, confiding to us once again, to the audience, expressing his thoughts aloud. And he says this, "To both these sisters have I sworn my love, each jealous, each suspicious of the other, as the stung are of the adder." You get bitten by that snake once, you're going to try to stay away from snakes. You're going to be very wary, right? And he continues, "Which of them shall I take? Both, one, or neither? neither can be enjoyed if both remain alive. So he's sort of painted himself into a corner, right? But if he makes the right move, he could end up King of Britain at this point. Because remember, it seems that Goneril and Regan at this point will have all the power if, and this is exactly what happens, if the British army defeats Cordelia's French army. Well, ultimately, Edmund enjoys neither. In the final scene of the play, Goneril poisons Regan to have Edmund for herself. Then, when Edmund is defeated and her betrayal of Albany is exposed, Goneril stabs herself off stage. Look at line 241 of Act 5, Scene 3. So this in our edition is the top of page 142. And this is, to me, quite an incredible moment. This is after the sisters' bodies have been brought on stage. You know, it's a murder-suicide. And the two Lear sisters, the two oldest daughters of King Lear, Goneril and Regan, are now both dead. Their bodies are on stage, and the dying Edmund, at line 241, top of page 142, the dying Edmund says this: "Yet Edmund was beloved, the one the other poisoned for my sake, and after slew herself." So I think it's a rather human moment. You know, it may reveal something about Edmund if we think back to our introduction to Edmund in Act 1, Scene 1, when he's treated so shoddily by his own father. You know, oh, the horse son must be acknowledged. When we find out through Edmund's soliloquy in Act 1, Scene 2, that all his life he's been marginalized, he's been treated horribly. You know, he can't inherit anything. He's deemed inferior due to his birth because he's illegitimate. I think in this line, where Edmund says, I think with a degree of astonishment, "Yet Edmund was beloved," I think we see that really Edmund wanted love. So it's a very human moment for this character. And as he dies from his wounds, Edmund, whom we've likely come to see as irredeemably evil, repents. He repents and tries to reverse the order he gave for Cordelia's murder. This is at line 245, so still on page 142. He says, "Some good I mean to do, despite mine own nature." The defeat of Edmund, Goneril, and Regan prompts a great deal of moralizing, standing over his half-brother. If we just go back a few pages, this is on page one. This is on page 139. And this is line 172. Edgar, standing over the defeated Edmund, expresses his certainty that, line 172, the gods are just, the gods are right and fair, and of our pleasant vices, of our immoral actions that bring us pleasure, make instruments to plague us, become the means to destroy us. The dark and vicious place, the adulterous bed, where he got, where Gloucester begot, brought into existence Edmund, cost him his eyes. To which Edmund responds at line 175, "Thou hast spoken right, 'tis true. The wheel has come full circle. I am here." You know, we've watched this journey of Edmund. He started at the bottom, right? And through lies, through betrayal, through seduction, through cunning, through ruthlessness, he got higher and higher in the social hierarchy to the point that he was oh so close. He got the title of Gloucester after he betrayed his father. He was oh so close to becoming king. But now he's been defeated by Edgar, his brother, the very person he betrayed at the beginning of this play. And he says, the wheel has come full circle. Well, when Albany, the Duke of Albany, Goneril's husband, learns of the deaths of his wife and of his sister-in-law Regan, he says this is at line 233. So let's just move a little bit further ahead in Act 5, Scene 3. This is the middle of page 141. And this is the Duke of Albany speaking. He says, "This judgment of the heavens that makes us tremble touches us not with pity." And that's because the judgment is just. Donald and Reagan got what they deserved. Well, in saying this point and using this phrase, the judgment of the heavens, we see here that Albany is confident that the gods intervene in human affairs to ensure that justice prevails. But then at line 258, so let's just turn over to page 142. At line 258, Lear enters the stage with the dead Cordelia in his arms. The captain, carrying out Edmund's orders, has hanged her. The old king, who has somehow killed her murderer, this is at line 276, he somehow killed the captain, but not before the captain hanged Cordelia. The old king is inconsolable. His words over Cordelia's body are incredibly moving. This is at starting at line 307, bottom of page 144. Lear says, "And my poor fool," he's holding his dead daughter's body in his arms. The worst nightmare of any parent. He says, "And my poor fool." And here, when he uses the term fool, as our note tells us, it's an affectionate term referring to Cordelia. It's not the fool, the jester character. But I like the fact that here at the very end of the play, he brings that word into his dialogue, because it does make us think of the fool, who we've not heard from since Act 3, Scene 6. He says, "And my poor fool is hanged. No, no, no life. Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life? And thou, Cordelia, no breath at all. Thou'lt come no more. Never, 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 never." Lines 307 to 310. So the final lines of this play are made even more poignant by Lear's remarks at the beginning of Act 5, Scene 3, when he and Cordelia are led off to prison. Let's just go back to the beginning of Act 5, Scene 3, and this is on page 131. And it's Cordelia speaking, starting at line number 3. Cordelia and her father, having lost the battle, are now being led away as prisoners. And Cordelia says this to her father: "We are not the first who with best meaning, best intentions, have incurred the worst. For thee, oppressed king, I am cast down. Myself could else outfrown false fortune's frown." She's saying, otherwise I could be defiant in the face of bad fortune, but for the fact that you will be suffering with me. Shall we not see these daughters and these sisters? So Cordelia here, being Cordelia, she says, "I have no regrets. We were defeated, but I made this decision to come back to help you because it was the right thing to do. I have no regrets about my decision. The only thing I feel bad about now is that you, my father, are suffering along with me." And she said, "Shall we go face them down? Shall we confront these my sisters, your daughters, and tell them what we feel about them, how we hold them in such regard?" And Lear says this. He says, "No, no, no, no. Come, let's away to prison. We two alone will sing like birds in the cage. When thou dost ask me blessing, I'll kneel down and ask of thee forgiveness." See, he's come to see the power of forgiveness. He says, "So we'll live and pray and sing and tell old tales and laugh at gilded butterflies, the fashionably dressed men and women of the royal court, and hear poor rogues talk of court news. And we'll talk with them too, who loses and who wins, who is in, who's out, and take upon us the mystery of things. They'll ponder the mysteries of life, the mysteries of human existence. They'll be philosophers, as if we were God's spies, and we'll outlast in a walled prison, packs and sects of great ones that ebb and flow by the moon, whose fortunes vary as the tide. So here Lear is saying that he can conceive of no greater happiness than being with Cordelia. The world of the royal court and its power games don't matter to him anymore. He gets the second chance with Cordelia that he desperately wanted, only to lose her again. And it's too much for Lear, who collapses. We just go to page 312, the final page of the text of the play. This is page 145, page 145 in line 312. And we get Lear's final words. He says, "Do you see this? Look on her. Look, her lips. Look there. Look there." Lines 312 to 313. And these lines suggest that he dies believing that Cordelia is still alive. We get this stage direction. He dies. Edgar then says, "He faints, my lord, my lord." He tries to wake Lear, and Kent says, "Break, heart, I prithee break." Kent knows Lear has suffered enough. Edgar, "Look up, my lord." Kent, "Vex not his ghost, oh, let him pass." And so Lear dies. He dies believing Cordelia might still be alive. The great Shakespearean critic A.D. Nuttall, one of my favorites, has observed that our sense of Lear's error deepens our pathos, deepens our sadness. Well, in the email that I sent, I included this handout, and I want to turn to this handout now. And hopefully you've printed it out and you have it in front of you. And this handout contains passages from the two sources that Shakespeare adapted in constructing the main plot of his play, King Lear, the story of King Lear and his daughters. And so what I've included on this handout are the final passages of both Raphael Holinshed's recounting of the King Lear story in his book Chronicles, his 1587 book Chronicles, and the end of this earlier play, this play that was written in first stage around 1590. We don't know who the playwright was. The play is The True Chronicle History of King Lear, L-E-I-R. And these passages that I'm going to share with you are found at the back of our signet edition of Shakespeare. So first, quoting from Holinshed's Chronicles. This is how the story ends in Holinshed, one of the two sources for Shakespeare, when Shakespeare came to write his version of the King Lear story. So read along with me. "Now when he, Lear, had informed his son-in-law and his daughter, the King of France and Cordelia, as Cordelia is named in the Chronicles, in what sort he had been used by his other daughters, Agoniptus, the name of the King of France, caused a mighty army to be put in readiness, and likewise a great navy of ships to be rigged, to pass over into Britain with Lear, his father-in-law, to see him again restored to his kingdom. It was decided that Cordelia should also go with him to take possession of the land, the which he promised to leave unto her as the rightful inheritor after his decease, notwithstanding any former grant made to her sisters and to their husbands in any manner or wise, in any way. When this army and navy of ships were ready, Lear and his daughter Cordelia, with their husband, took the sea, and arriving in Britain, fought with their enemies, and discomfited, defeated them in battle, in the which Meglanus, who is the Albany character, Shakespeare renamed the character Albany, and Henius, who's the Cornwall character, were slain. And then was Lear restored to his kingdom, which he ruled after this by the space of 2 years, and then died 40 years after he first began to reign. So that's the end of the story as Shakespeare found it in Holinshed's Chronicles. Let's look at the end of the story as dramatized in the earlier play, the true chronicle history of King Lear. So at this point in the story, it's not the British army that's won the battle, it's the French army. The French army, led by the King of France, who's much more prominent in the source material than he is in Shakespeare's play, alongside his wife, Cordelia, have won the day, and they've defeated the Goneril and Regan's army. So at the very end of this play, the anonymously written 1590 play that Shakespeare adapted, we have the Gallian king, the French king, talking. And he says this: "Thanks be to God, your foes, my father-in-law King Lear's foes, are overcome, and you again possessed of your right." He's back as king. And Lear then says, "First to the heavens, next thanks to you, my son, by whose good means I repossess the same, my kingdom, which if it please you to accept yourself, with all my heart I will resign to you, for it is yours by right and none of mine. And I'm so grateful that you restored me, that you defeated my enemies. You can have the throne of Britain. First, have you raised at your own charge a power of valiant soldiers? This comes all from you. Next, have you ventured your own person scathed? You've risked your own life on my behalf. And lastly, worthy Gallia never stained, his reputation for honor is unquestioned. My kingly title I by thee have gained." And the King of France, the Gallian king, Cordelia's husband, says, "Thank heavens, not me. My zeal, my support to you is such. Command my utmost. Command from me all I have to give. I will never grudge. I'll never complain." And then Cordelia, the Cordelia character in this version of the story, interjects, saying, "He that with all kind love entreats his queen will not be to her father unkind seen." And finally, Lear himself, a very much living Lear, wraps up the play by saying, "Oh, my Cordelia, now I call to mind the modest answer which I took unkind. But now I see I am no whit beguiled. I haven't been deceived. Thou lovest me dearly as ought a child. Come, son and daughter, who did me advance, you saved me. Repose with me a while, and then for trance, and then for France." And so the play ends with the sound of drums and trumpets, and the characters basically live happily ever after. The good guys have won. So you see, in both Holinshed's Chronicles and in the earlier King Lear play, Cordelia lives and Lear is restored to the throne. It's Shakespeare, when he came to adapt this story, this quite well-known story in his age, in the 16th century. When Shakespeare came to adapt the story, he changed the ending to the one that we have, where Cordelia dies and Lear then dies of grief. He isn't restored to the throne. So that's the question I have for you that I'd like you to answer in a paragraph of a few sentences. 4 to 6 sentences will suffice. I'd like to know your thoughts on why you think Shakespeare changed the ending. Why did he give this happy ending a tragic conclusion when he adapted the story for his play? So I'd like you to consider that question. There's one more passage from the play, though, I want to share with you today. And so let's just go to page 140, because there's Gloucester's storyline that needs to be wrapped up. And in Act 5, Scene 3, the final scene of the play, we learn that Gloucester, like Lear, dies reconciled to the child who truly loved him. This isn't shown on stage, but it's reported by Edgar. Once Edgar reveals who he truly is, reveals himself to the fallen Edmund, reveals himself to Albany, and tells the story of how the falsely accused Edgar disguised himself, pretended to be a beggar, helped his father, and got to this moment where he was able to avenge himself on Edmund and in fact save the kingdom, basically. And so this is what this was Edgar reports to Albany. He reports the fate of his father Gloucester, and this is at line 195. So this is on page 140, and this is Edgar speaking. He says, "Until some half hour passed, when I was armed, not sure though hoping of this good success, this fortunate outcome, I asked his blessing. I asked the blessing of my father, and from first to last told him our pilgrimage, our journey that we went on together, even though he didn't know it was me. He didn't know it was his son Edgar. I disguised myself throughout this journey." He says, but his flawed, his cracked heart, alack, too weak the conflict to support, twixt two extremes, joy and grief, burst smilingly. Lines 195 to 201. So Gloucester dies, but Gloucester dies reconciled to his son, knowing that Edgar did all of that for him, even after he so badly mistreated his oldest son. And thus ends the subplot of this play. Though I guess by this point in Shakespeare's play, the plot and the subplot have become so intertwined, they have almost become a single plot. And that's one of the essay questions you might choose to tackle when you write your King Lear essay. But for now, we'll leave it there. And like I say, those of you watching this video, I'd like you to write a short paragraph on why you think Shakespeare changed the ending of the story and gave it this tragic conclusion that he did. Okay, well, we'll leave it there, and I will see you soon.